We're opening a really fascinating chapter of the archives today.
Right.
One that requires us to step back and completely re-examine the fundamental laws of reality on the Sword Coast. So, welcome to another historical deep dive.
Thank you. Yes, it's a very heavy topic today.
It is. We are looking at a juncture in the historical record that scholars they refer to it simply as the sky became an eye.
Which is a brilliant title.
Right. It sounds like poetry or maybe a myth, but the records we are unpacking for you today are grounded in cold, documented fact. Today, we are analyzing the morning exactly after the battle at Old Owlwell.
Exactly.
We're going to explore how a quiet morning of recovery just completely fractured. It fractured into an event that proved to Plep, Bilep, Turin, Ohio Jim, Imogen, Valindra, and Lyra that the scope of their journey was tied to forces far, far larger than their own survival.
It is a profound historical juncture, and as we examine the architecture of this event, you, as the listener, it is crucial to understand that we are not discussing fables here. We are detailing chronomantic fractures, anomalous arcana, and direct divine intervention.
Yeah.
My focus today will be on the mechanics of these anomalies. What actually happens to the physical world when unimaginably powerful divination magic is focused on a single point in space and time? What does it mean physically and temporally when a god of prophecy intervenes in the mortal plane?
And I want to keep our focus grounded in the humanity of the people experiencing this. The emotional weight of this specific morning is, frankly, staggering. To understand what happens to this party, you have to understand the physical and psychological baseline they were operating from.
The fatigue.
Yes, the fatigue. They had just survived a grueling claustrophobic night. They fought off ice-encrusted undead in the ruins of a collapsed tower. The air they are breathing still carries the scent of burnt rock, ozone, and decay. They are wounded. They are exhausted to the marrow of their bones. They wake up just trying to put one foot in front of the other.
The fatigue is an important variable. It affects decision-making, it alters sensory perception, and honestly, it lowers magical resistance. Yet, remarkably, their investigative instincts remain really sharp.
They do.
As they gather their wits beneath a makeshift canopy outside the broken stump of the old Owlwell Tower, they begin examining a text they recovered. The book is titled Observations Upon the Ruins of Old Owl Tower and the Fall of Conyberry.
I really want to spend some time on this book because it provides the psychological framework for everything that happens next. This isn't just a dry ledger or a geographical survey. It's a chronicle of profound tragedy.
Very much so.
The text details the fall of the town of Conyberry to barbarian raiders.
Aww.
But it's the specific reaction of the townsfolk to their inevitable destruction that really stands out to me. Faced with an insurmountable force, they didn't attempt to bribe the raiders.
No, they didn't.
They didn't use their wealth to hire mercenaries or buy their way to safety. Instead, the community gathered their entire fortune, every single piece of gold they possessed, and they just melted it down.
It is a socioeconomic decision that completely defies standard survival logic. When a civilization is threatened, currency is usually hoarded or mobilized for defense. To willingly destroy your own economy is a fascinating application of a scorched earth tactic, but elevated to a spiritual level.
Yeah.
They transform their liquid wealth, the very mechanism of their societal trade, into a single immobile artifact, a sacred golden bell. And they place this bell at the Shrine of Savras, the deity governing divination, truth, and fate.
I look at that decision, and I see supreme defiance. It's an act of collective spite against their attackers, denying them the spoils of war. But it's also an act of profound desperation. They knew they were going to be slaughtered.
Record records show the town was sacked and its people were wiped out.
Exactly. They surrendered their material present to invest entirely in a spiritual symbol. They essentially purchased a monument to their own end.
I would frame it slightly differently, but less as spite and more as a metaphysical transaction.
Okay, how so?
Well, by offering the entirety of their accumulated wealth to Savras, the god of prophecy, they were essentially attempting to buy a place in the historical narrative. They were ensuring that while their physical bodies would be destroyed, their final act would echo in the domain of fate. And this is where the historical artifact becomes relevant to our party. It is not just the printed text of the book that alters their trajectory. It is a piece of marginalia.
Right, yes. The peddler's note. In the margins of this history book, an anonymous traveling peddler left a handwritten observation. It's a single sentence that changes the entire context of the Golden Bell. The note claims that the Bell of Conyberry, born from the melted gold of a doomed people, is said to ring not for the present, but for the future.
Let us isolate that phrase. Not for the present, but for the future. That is a chilling piece of information to digest when you are an individual already entangled in strange prophecies. Consider the psychology of the party at this exact moment.
It's heavy.
Very. They are navigating a web of shifting alliances, they possess a mysterious puzzle box of unknown origin, and they are constantly reacting to threats they do not fully understand. They read about a bell of prophecy, and it acts as a gravitational anomaly. It creates an undeniable pull toward the Shrine of Savras.
It provides something they desperately lack, which is direction. A sense of purpose amid the chaos of simple survival. They decide that the Shrine of Savras just has to be their next destination. They need answers, and this bell seems to promise them.
But the reality of the Sword Coast intervenes.
Yeah, the harsh, unforgiving reality of the wild doesn't wait for philosophical revelations. It snaps them back to the immediate present. Because while they were fighting for their lives against the undead the night before, their camp logistics had completely unraveled.
Completely.
They realized that during their desperate flight from the White Dragon, Cryovane, just prior to the undead attack, their wagon and their beast of burden, their ox, were abandoned.
It was a severe tactical error, forced by extreme duress to leave their primary mode of transport and supply unsecured. You cannot fight an apex predator from the sky, manage a horde of animated corpses, and maintain a defensive perimeter around a wagon simultaneously. But the consequences of that lost logistics chain must now be faced.
I have to push back on calling it an error, though.
Oh.
I mean, if you are boxed in by undead in the dark and being hunted by a dragon, keeping the ox isn't a tactic, it's a death sentence. Was there really any other mathematical probability of survival? It was a calculated sacrifice.
A fair counterpoint. Let us call it an enforced sacrifice, then. However, the result remains a critical vulnerability. Without the wagon, their mobility and their capacity to carry necessary survival gear are drastically reduced.
So, to assess the damage, Lyra, Imogen, and Turin form a scouting party. They head back down the rugged, rocky terrain from the tower to the spot where they were forced to leave the cart. And the scene they discover is a forensic portrait of overwhelming predatory power.
The documentation of the wreckage is highly specific here. The wagon is not merely damaged or overturned, it is snapped cleanly in half as if struck by a siege engine. Furthermore, the wooden remnants and the surrounding soil are completely frozen solid, encased in an unyielding block of opaque ice.
The heavy leather harness that held the ox has been snapped like brittle twine. The beast of burden is simply gone. But the detail that truly paralyzes the scouting party is what is left in the earth. Carved deeply into the frozen mud are massive claw tracks. The records compare the size of these prints to heavy infantry shields.
The signature of Cryovane, the apex predator of the region. This evidence requires us to reevaluate the dragon's behavior entirely.
Right, it wasn't just random.
Precisely. It did not merely attack the party the previous day to terrorize them or defend territory. It was actively hunting. It utilized the chaos of the party's flight to isolate and extract their beast of burden for sustenance.
It's psychological warfare, whether the dragon intends it that way or not. The sheer scale of those claw marks communicates a very clear hierarchy. The dragon is letting them know that they are not the hunters in this wilderness. They are the prey. And a creature that can snap a reinforced wagon in half and fly off with an ox can take what it wants when it wants with total impunity.
It strips away the illusion of control. When you observe evidence of power that vastly exceeds your own physical capabilities, the human mind really struggles to process the disparity.
Which brings us back to the party's resilience. I want you to picture standing on that frozen road, staring at shield-sized claw marks, feeling the residual cold radiating off a shattered wagon. You have no transport. Your food supplies are compromised. The most dangerous entity in the region knows exactly where you are and views your camp as a pantry.
A normal group would break.
Exactly. A normal group of travelers would scatter, or they would turn back to the nearest fortified settlement and refuse to ever leave again.
Statistically, yes. The instinct for self-preservation usually overrides a quest for knowledge when faced with a verified apex predator.
But this group does not break. They salvage the bare essentials, their bedrolls, whatever minor supplies survive the freezing impact, and they pivot. They acknowledge they will eventually need to reach Butterskull Ranch to resupply, but they remain fiercely committed to their new path. They strap what they have to their backs and set off on foot, walking down the dusty, exposed road toward the Shrine of Savras.
It is a testament to their fortitude, or perhaps their fatalism. Walking that road, exposed to the sky, carrying only what they can bear on their shoulders, knowing the White Dragon is in the vicinity. They are preparing themselves for a physical ambush. They are completely, fundamentally unprepared for a breakdown of physical laws.
This is where the record shifts from a harrowing tale of wilderness survival into something that challenges the boundaries of sanity. The sensory details documented during their walk down this road are extraordinary. It begins as the typical rugged journey. Dust, gravel, the heat of the day, and then the atmosphere shifts.
Radically.
It doesn't transition slowly. It is a violent, immediate cessation of normalcy.
To understand what happens next, we need to provide a framework for how magic interacts with the physical environment. We often think of magic as spells cast by individuals, a fireball, a healing touch. But divination magic, specifically at a divine tier, operates differently. Imagine the universe as a densely woven tapestry, and mortal divination magic is a single hand gently pulling a thread to peek at the pattern beneath.
Right.
When a deity of prophecy focuses their attention on a specific point in space and time, it is not a gentle pull. It is the equivalent of a gravitational singularity forming over that tapestry. It warps the fabric of reality around it.
And the biological response to that warping is terrifying. The first thing that happens is the death of sound. The bird song just stops. The crunch of their own boots on the gravel vanishes. They can see their feet hitting the ground, but there's absolute dead silence. And then the air itself changes.
The pressure drop.
Yeah, the pressure drops radically. It feels like the atmosphere right before a catastrophic storm, when the air grows unbearably heavy, but multiplied by a factor of 100. It pushes down on their shoulders, causing a dull, throbbing pain at the base of their skulls.
The drop in atmospheric pressure and the cessation of acoustics are physical manifestations of the magical field stabilizing around them. The environment is being suppressed to make way for a higher order manifestation. And then the thermal energy is rapidly drained from the area. But it is crucial to note that this is not natural meteorological cold. The records describe the road frosting over in glass-like veins.
It's so visceral.
It is not a blanket of snow falling from the sky. It is creeping, intricate veins of frost shooting across the earth like a crystalline nervous system.
The panic sets in when this unnatural frost interacts with living tissue. Lyra is riding her horse, and in a fraction of a second, the creeping frost reaches the animal's hooves. The horse doesn't just get cold, it freezes completely solid mid-step. It becomes a frozen statue instantly.
Just instant thermal drain.
Lyra and Valindra Eladithas, who is riding with her, have to react on pure unthinking adrenaline. They leap from the saddle, throwing themselves away from the freezing mount to avoid being instantly encased in that same unyielding crystalline structure.
It is a silent chaos, a desperate fight against an environmental hazard that operates faster than human reflexes. And this environment forces a variety of survival responses from the party. Look at the documentation of Ohio Jim's reaction.
Ohio Jim's reaction is a fascinating case study in rogue instincts pushed to the breaking point. He doesn't understand the cosmic mechanics of what is happening, but his body screams at him that he's being targeted. And a rogue's first instinct is always to hide.
Naturally.
But he doesn't just duck behind a boulder. He attempts to disguise his very essence. He physically shrinks his frame, curling inward, attempting to mask his scent, steadying his breathing to a near stop. He is trying to erase his biological footprint from whatever reality-altering force is descending upon the road.
I view it as a brilliantly pragmatic, if ultimately absurd, response. He is applying terrestrial stealth tactics to a cosmic event. You cannot hide your scent from a god of prophecy. But from a psychological standpoint, the attempt to hide is a mechanism to maintain a sense of agency. Imogen, however, understands the futility of hiding.
Yes, Imogen's reaction is entirely different. Drawing on her innate sorceress power and her understanding of divine forces, she recognizes the sensation pushing down on them. She realizes this is not a physical attack. It is not a dragon swooping down or an army ambushing them. It is the overwhelming, paralyzing weight of unimaginable divination magic.
It roots them to the spot.
Exactly. They are physically paralyzed, unable to resist the pull of this localized gravity well of knowledge.
They are caught in the focal point of divine attention. And it is at this moment of total paralysis that the sky alters. The visual spectacle recorded here is the kind of event that breaks the architecture of a mortal mind. The clouds above them do not merely gather, they twist into a mathematically perfect spiral. A massive, unnatural circle forms in the heavens.
The scale is incomprehensible. We aren't talking about a shape in the clouds, we are talking about a structure that blots out the horizon. And then, a beam of pure, blinding light cuts directly across the center of that cloud circle,
forming a gigantic, unblinking eye, a pupil of light in an iris of storm clouds.
The sky fundamentally becomes an eye. The curvature of the iris matches the curve of the earth, and it is staring directly down at them.
The manifestation of the divine symbol of Savras, the Lord of Divination, the All-Seeing. For a deity to project their iconography on such a geological scale indicates an event of monumental historical and prophetic importance. The party is no longer traversing a dirt road on the Sword Coast. They have been pulled onto a cosmic stage.
And the experience becomes deeply, terrifyingly intimate. It isn't just a spectacle to be observed from afar. Imogen, standing paralyzed under the weight of that gaze, experiences something profoundly unsettling. While the eye stares down, she receives a private, whispered message directly into her mind from this cosmic entity.
The transmission of divine knowledge directly into a mortal consciousness is an incredibly dangerous process. The human brain is not wired to process the bandwidth of a god. The records omit the exact contents of the whisper, but the implication is heavy. Divination deities do not initiate contact to offer comfort. They impart truths that carry the weight of worlds. And this specific whisper serves as the catalyst for the climax of this temporal event.
Because the moment the whisper ends, reality gives way. I mean that in a tangible sense. The world around them fractures. The air, the road, the sky, it all cracks. Spiderwebbing with glowing fissures and then shatters around them like an infinitely large pane of glass breaking into a million jagged pieces.
The total spatial collapse.
The sheer violence of the visual, the sensation of the world breaking apart into void, and then total darkness.
A violent transition through the temporal strata. We are talking about a chronomantic displacement. The magic has ripped them from their current coordinate in space-time and forcefully deposited them elsewhere. When the shattering subsides and sensory input returns, they awaken to find that the where and the when have been entirely rewritten.
Let's orient ourselves in this new reality. They are still physically standing on the same coordinates, the road near the ruins of Old Owl Well. But the morning light is gone. The sky is a suffocating pitch black, and the dead silence has been replaced by the soft, persistent sound of falling snow. The world is buried under thick, pristine drifts, but the most jarring anomaly is the architecture.
The tower.
Right, the old Alwell Tower, the ruined, crumbling stone stump they had just camped in, isn't ruined anymore.
The tower stands tall, its masonry perfectly whole and unblemished. Furthermore, the structure is humming with energy. The ancient stones are alive with glowing blue arcane runes, pulsing with power. This confirms the nature of the chronomantic displacement. They have been thrust backward in time. They are observing the old Owl Well watchtower during an era when it was a functioning, highly magical military outpost of a long-vanished empire.
The implications of standing in a past era are dizzying, and the anomalies of their displacement become immediately apparent. The first major crisis. Valindra Eladithis is gone. She and the horse that was frozen on the road did not make the transition through the shattered glass of reality.
The absence of Valindra presents a terrifying consequence of chronomantic travel. The magical displacement pulled the party, but it failed to anchor her. Why? Perhaps her status as a cleric of Talos, a chaotic deity of storms and destruction, created an interference pattern with the highly structured divination magic of Savras. Or perhaps the chaotic nature of the fracture itself simply lost her in the void between seconds. She has been categorically erased from this specific timeline.
And while they are processing the loss of a companion, the environment presents another narrative. Lying half buried in the pristine snow is a shattered merchant wagon. It is not their wagon. It is an entirely different design, clearly belonging to a different era. And surrounding this wreckage, frozen solid in the ice and snow, are the bodies of long-dead merchants. But the detail that sends a shiver down the spine is the tracks in the snow around the bodies. Massive shield-sized claw prints.
The exact identical tracks they observed around their own ruined wagon in their present timeline, the undeniable signature of Cryervane. This finding suggests the deeply unsettling, cyclical nature to the dragon's predation. It implies that the beast has been hunting this specific territory, using these exact tactics for an era. Alternatively, it suggests the timeline itself is folding these events over one another, echoing their present trauma into the deep past.
And amidst this temporal nightmare, standing under a black sky, freezing in the snow, looking at ancient dead bodies and impossible architecture, we have Ohio Jim. The dwarf rogue looks at the frozen corpses of merchants from a bygone era, and his immediate action is to pull out his tools, chip away the ancient ice, and recover a few copper pieces from the pockets of the dead.
From an external perspective, looting copper pennies during a cosmic temporal displacement borders on the absurd. However, from a psychological standpoint, it is an incredibly robust grounding mechanism. When the sky becomes an eye, when time flows backward, and when companions vanish into the ether, the mortal mind desperately seeks mundane systems to maintain structural integrity. For a rogue whose life is built on commerce and acquisition, securing currency is a fundamental law of reality.
It makes sense.
If the cold metal of the coin is real in his palm, then he is real. He's using the economy to anchor himself in a completely unmoored situation.
I see it as pure defiance, honestly. A refusal to let the cosmos distract him from the hustle. But the party doesn't have the luxury of time to debate economics or temporal theory. The ambient temperature is dropping rapidly. The well itself, the actual old owl well in the center of the courtyard, is capped with thick, opaque ice, and the heavy door to the restored, glowing tower is sealed tight. The cold is becoming lethal.
They have to act.
Imogen, operating on pure survival instinct, steps forward to solve the immediate physical problem. She taps deeply into her draconian heritage, channels the heat within her chest, and unleashes her red dragonborn fire breath. She sends a searing arc of superheated flame across the courtyard to melt the ice, sealing the well and the tower door.
It is a logical action designed to secure shelter, but one fraught with severe elemental consequences. We must consider the thermodynamics of Arcana. Introducing extreme magical heat into an environment of highly concentrated, ancient, magical cold is bound to cause a volatile reaction. You are not just melting ice, you are destabilizing an arcane equilibrium.
Volatile is an understatement. The sudden, violent rush of superheated air against the ancient ice doesn't just clear a path, it triggers a response. Perhaps it's an ancient automated defense system, or perhaps the heat simply awakens what was entombed there. From the boiling, melting waters of the well, two hostile ice mephits, vicious winged elemental creatures composed entirely of frost, jagged ice, and malice, burst forth into the air.
And the tower door?
Yes, simultaneously from the dark interior of the now open tower door, the sudden influx of heat animates the dead. Frozen, ice-encrusted undead soldiers lumber out into the snow, their movements stiff and unyielding.
The clash of timelines and elemental forces creates an environment of immediate tactical chaos. The party is now forced to engage the undead guards of the past, awakened by the arcane fire of the present, in an environment that is actively draining their body heat.
The skirmish that erupts in that snowy courtyard is brutal. It is a desperate, violent fight for survival against the environment as much as against the enemies. And there are some heroic actions taken here that require a deep analytical breakdown. Because when reality shatters and the chips are down, this group displays a martial and magical synergy that is frankly legendary. Let's begin with Plepyep, the Turtle Druid. We typically categorize turtles as methodical, highly defensive, slow-moving beings relying on their heavy shells. That is categorically not what happens here.
The application of his druidic wild shape in this specific scenario is both tactically flawless and biologically astonishing. To understand what he does, we must explain the mechanics of wild shape. It is not an illusion, it is a rapid, druidic-induced cellular restructuring. The druid channels raw, primal natural energy to physically transmute their biology into another form.
He doesn't just choose a form to match the snow, like a winter wolf or a bear. He chooses direct, elemental opposition. He transforms into a massive, sinuous fire snake. I want you to picture the sheer sensory whiplash of this moment. The sky is black. The snow is pristine white. The ancient runes on the tower are pulsing a cold blue. And suddenly, the large turtle undergoes this violent transmutation. His heavy calcium shell dissolves into raw elemental energy, and a colossal serpent wreathes itself in roaring orange flame.
The thermal output must have been incredible.
He begins throwing off a thick, pungent, spicy smoke that fills the freezing air. Everywhere his new serpentine body slithers, the ancient snow hisses and violently flashes into steam. He becomes a literal, localized heating element, countering the environmental drain. He is biting, he's wrapping around the frozen undead, striking with his tail, turning the icy battlefield into a cauldron.
It is a brilliant tactical pivot. By becoming a creature composed of pure thermal energy, he forces the ice mephits and the frozen undead to engage an entity whose very existence physically degrades their structural integrity. He turns their own elemental composition against them. However, mephits are not mindless beasts. They are highly intelligent elemental beings with their own innate magical capacities. They recognize the severe threat the fire snake poses, and they counter this advantage immediately.
Right. One of the mephits, hovering above the steam and snow, taps into its innate magic and conjures a thick, heavy fog cloud. The cloud rapidly rolls over the entire courtyard, dropping visibility to zero. The visual clarity of the fight is instantly erased. It turns a tactical brawl into an absolute nightmare. The party is swallowed by a swirling gray mist. You can't see the ice-encrusted undead until their frozen hands are inches from your face. You have no idea where the mephits are in the sky above you.
Engaging in combat within heavy obscurement requires immense spatial awareness, discipline, and trust in your peripheral senses. Without visual confirmation, panic is the standard response. This is where the diverse, specialized skill sets of the party truly shine. They do not succumb to panic. They systematically adapt to the sensory deprivation.
Let's examine how Ohio Jim adapts, because it's a masterclass in utilizing the mundane against the magical. The rogue is blinded by the fog. He cannot establish a clear line of sight for his crossbow, and stepping into close quarters melee against the undead without seeing them is suicide. So he alters the terrain. He pulls out a simple pouch of metal ball bearings and scatters them across the top of a low stone wall that the undead are using as an approach vector.
It is a classic non-magical hazard deployed with perfect timing. In an environment dominated by ancient runes, elemental fire, and summoned fog, he relies on simple physics and friction.
Exactly. The mindless undead, possessing no tactical awareness, lumber forward blindly through the fog. They step onto the stone wall, hit the rolling bearings, lose their footing, and go crashing down into the snow. And the moment they are prone, the moment they create a disruption in the fog by falling, Ohio Jim is there. He uses that split-second opening to fire precise, devastating crossbow bolts through the murky mist, pinning the fallen undead to the frozen earth. It is blue-collar, gritty combat tactics executing perfectly in the middle of a high arcane storm.
While the rogue controls the ground and limits enemy mobility, the frontline fighters must hold the line within the cloud. Lyra, the Sea Elf Paladin, moves with lethal, disciplined precision through the blinding fog. She engages the frozen undead head-on, trusting her armor and her reflexes. She is driving her blade deep into these icy foes. The records describe the visceral, kinetic impact of her strikes. The steel blade pierces the ice-encrusted, necrotic flesh, and the undead simply freeze entirely from the structural damage and shatter into shards of bone and ice under the sheer force of her blows. She's a thresher moving through the mist.
But despite their success on the ground, the fog remains a critical vulnerability, primarily because of the remaining mephit. It is hovering somewhere above the obscurement, using the cloud as cover to dive down, strike, and retreat back into the gray void. The party cannot establish air superiority. This is the moment Turn Redfoot steps into the center of the narrative to deliver the finishing blow. And this sequence is an act of pure, athletic heroism. Turin, the rock gnome barbarian, is on the ground. He is surrounded by swirling fog and the sounds of breaking ice. But he doesn't swing wildly. He tracks the movement of the air. He listens to the specific hum of the mephit's wings. He spots a fractional break in the mist, a momentary thinning of the fog, and he sees the elemental hovering high above the courtyard. He readies a javelin. He plants his feet, shifts his weight, channels every ounce of his formidable rage-fueled strength, and hurls that javelin blindly into the sky.
Let us analyze the physics of that throw. Striking a small, highly mobile, flying target while standing in heavy obscurement using an unguided projectile, it requires a calculation of trajectory, wind resistance, and target anticipation that borders on the miraculous. It is an intersection of raw physical power and profound martial intuition.
The record confirms it is a perfect, dead center strike. The javelin arcs through the fog and pierces the mephit mid-flight. The kinetic and material shock to the elemental is instantaneous. The creature immediately freezes completely solid around the wood and steel of the javelin. It hangs in the air for a fraction of a second, a frozen monument to the strike, and then it simply dissolves. Its structural integrity fails, and it breaks apart into harmless, drifting snow that joins the flurry already falling silently around the party.
A highly decisive, physically demanding end to the immediate tactical threat. However, as scholars of chronomantic and prophetic events know all too well, the physical combat in these scenarios is rarely the true danger. The battle in the snow was not the purpose of their displacement. The combat was merely the gatekeeper. It was the stress test required before the true revelation could be delivered.
That is undeniably true. Because the very second the last shard of that mephit hits the ground, the physical environment begins to reject them again. The frozen world, the black sky, the blinding snow, the humming blue runes of the restored tower, it all begins to dissolve and bleed away. The party is thrown forcefully back into the temporal blender. But this time, they are not deposited in a new physical location. The physical world vanishes entirely. They are thrown into a rapid-fire sequence of prophetic, world-altering visions.
This specific sequence is documented as the prophecy of the scales, and this is the intellectual core of our deep dive today. We must pay the utmost attention to these images because every single vision forced into their minds by the Eye of Savras carries massive geopolitical, existential, and theological implications for the future of the entire Sword Coast. A deity of divination does not project idle dreams. They are showing the party the load-bearing pillars of the future.
The cascade of visions is described as a violent assault on the senses. The images flash with terrifying speed. Let's break down exactly what they saw because you, as a listener, need to grasp the sheer crushing scale of the threats looming over these individuals. Vision number 1. They see an army, but it is not a disorganized raiding party or a loose coalition of bandits. They witness thousands of goblins marching in perfect, disciplined, lockstep formation across the landscape.
That image alone represents a geopolitical earthquake. Goblins are traditionally chaotic, tribal, and highly fractious creatures. They do not form disciplined standing armies of their own volition. To see thousands marching in unison implies the existence of a unifying, terrifying command structure. And the vision explicitly provides the source of that discipline. The army is led by a hobgoblin warlord, a master of martial strategy and subjugation.
But the detail that elevates this from a regional concern to a continental threat is the insignia. Every shield carried by that marching horde is marked with the same crude, bloody symbol. A red handprint.
The Red Hands. If this vision is an accurate projection of the future, it signifies the mobilization of a monstrous military complex unlike anything the Sword Coast has seen in centuries. A highly disciplined, goblinoid force of that size, unified under the banner of the Red Hands, is not interested in raiding caravans. They are a force capable of sieging major cities, wiping out established settlements, and redrawing the borders of civilization. It escalates the party's reality from local adventuring to the precipice of regional warfare.
And just as their minds try to process the logistics of a goblin war, the vision brutally shifts, scaling up the terror exponentially. The viewpoint is wrenched upward into the sky, and rising slowly, ominously, from behind a thick bank of storm clouds are 5 enormous dragon heads.
The draconic iconography here is unmistakable to anyone even tangentially versed in arcane lore. 5 distinct heads, each representing a different chromatic lineage, moving as a single, terrible entity. While the historical records refrain from naming the entity explicitly, perhaps out of fear, the implication of the Queen of Dragons is heavy, suffocating, and undeniable.
To give you a sense of scale on what this means, the party has been running from Cryovane, a white dragon. Cryovane is terrifying. But in the shadow of this vision, how do we categorize that threat?
To understand the 5 heads, we must establish a hierarchy of draconic power. To a normal mortal, a regional white dragon like Cryovane is the equivalent of a natural disaster. It is a localized hurricane with teeth. It can destroy a town or decimate a forest. But the 5-headed entity? That is not a disaster. That is the end of the concept of weather altogether. It represents an extinction-level event for the pantheon and the material plane. It contextualizes their entire struggle. Cryovane is not the central threat. Cryovane is merely a minor symptom of a much larger, apocalyptic draconic disease that is preparing to spread across the world.
The psychological whiplash of moving from a marching army to an apocalyptic god is intense, but the third vision snaps them back from the cosmic to the deeply, painfully personal. The vast sky vanishes, and they are looking into a smaller, enclosed space. Standing there is Gundren Rockseeker, their friend, their employer, the dwarven patron whose initial disappearance set their entire grueling journey in motion. Gundren is holding the mysterious puzzle box.
The artifact they have been orbiting, an object of immense yet fundamentally unknown arcane power.
But Gundren is not alone in the room. Standing directly behind him, looming over his shoulder, is a shadowy figure draped in heavy red robes. And this is where the vision targets the party's paranoia. The face of this red-robed figure is not static. It is actively shifting and boiling. First, it displays the face of a drow. Then the features melt and morph into the face of Nessa. Then it shifts again, shrinking into the visage of a shape-shifting child they had encountered. And finally, it settles into a face that none of them recognize at all, a complete unknown.
This sequence is a divine masterclass in communicating the nature of deception. The shifting face is not meant to identify a single culprit. It represents a vast, interconnected, and highly sophisticated web of lies. It informs the party that the enemy manipulating events is not a single identifiable individual. It is an organization, a cabal utilizing shape-changers, illusionists, and deep-cover manipulators.
It weaponizes their own memories against them. To see Nez's face in that rapid sequence, someone they have spoken to, someone whose motives they have already questioned, it provides divine confirmation that they are surrounded by actors wearing masks. It tells them that the puzzle box is the gravitational center of a massive conspiracy, and Gundren, their friend, is standing directly in the crosshairs of people who can look like anyone. How do you trust a single person you meet after seeing that?
You don't. The vision induces a necessary state of hypervigilance, and then the sequence delivers its final, most complex image. The enclosed room fades, replaced by the interior of a magnificent temple. It is a structure grander and more opulent than anything the party has encountered. The architecture soaring. Above the central altar in this vast space, a massive, glowing eye floats in midair, casting a brilliant light over the dark stone. Priests are visible in the shadows below, their voices raised in a resonant, rhythmic chant. It is an image of profound spiritual power and entrenched worship.
A grand temple of Savras, a monument to the very god currently showing them these visions.
Correct. But the vision is not a static postcard. Suddenly, horrific violence strikes the structure. The vision doesn't just fade to black, the temple is physically annihilated. Massive stone pillars groan and give way. The vaulted ceiling caves in, raining masonry down upon the chanting priests. And then, the focal point of the horror, the divine glowing eye hovering above the altar cracks violently and shatters into total darkness.
The emotional weight of watching a god show you the destruction of their own symbol. It is a crushing intellectual burden. You survive a freezing fight to the death with undead, and your reward is being informed that a continent-spanning army is marching, a multi-headed dragon god is rising to bring about the apocalypse. Your only friend is completely surrounded by shape-shifting traitors, and the very concept of divine truth is collapsing in on itself.
The shattering of the divine eye within the vision is the most difficult element to interpret. Are they witnessing a historical recounting of the fall of a specific physical temple, much like the fall of Conyberry they read about that morning? Or is Savras communicating through high-level prophetic metaphor? If the eye of divination shatters, does it symbolize that the power of prophecy itself is breaking? That the timeline is becoming so convoluted and dark that not even the god of fate can clearly see what is going to happen next?
That is a terrifying prospect.
Yeah.
The idea of divine blindness. And they don't have time to analyze it, because the visions are accelerating. The images begin flashing faster and faster, blending into a strobing light that completely overwhelms the visual and cognitive senses of Imogen, Lyra, Turin, Plepjalep, and Ohio Jim.
The sensory overload is a deliberate mechanism. It forces the mortal consciousness to grasp the vastness, the sheer momentum of the machinations at play. The heroes are being shown the terrifying machinery of fate operating far, far above their capacity to intervene. They are being shown that they are very small cogs in a very large, very dangerous cosmic machine.
And as the visions accelerate to a blinding, painful speed, the sensory input begins to bleed back into physical reality. The overwhelming light fades, and the snow returns. But it is not the soft, silent, eerie snow of the restored Old Owl Well anymore. It is falling in thick, blinding, furious curtains. It is a blizzard born of pure atmospheric rage.
The transition from the ethereal realm of prophecy back to the immediate, visceral danger of the physical world. The storm is gathering.
It begins with the audio. The silence that marked their initial transition is violently broken by a howling wind that cuts right through their clothing and armor, and underneath the high-pitched shriek of the wind, they hear something else. A slow, rhythmic, impossibly heavy beating sound. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of enormous wings displacing massive amounts of air directly above their heads.
The atmospheric disturbance is immense. The apex predator has located them within the temporal storm.
The final image of this historical record is one that leaves you breathless. The blinding snow parts for just a fraction of a second, creating a vertical tunnel of visibility. And diving straight down from the black clouds is a massive white dragon, Croyovane. But the beast doesn't land on the broken, crumbling rubble they camped in yesterday. The dragon descends and lands directly atop the apex of the restored, ancient glowing tower of Old Owl Well.
The visual juxtaposition recorded here is striking. You have a primal beast, a creature composed of raw ice, instinct, and fury, perching upon a monument of highly ordered, ancient, arcane architecture. It is the collision of the untamed wilds and forgotten civilization.
The records describe the dragon with terrifying clarity. The beast's scales are not merely white, they are interlocking plates of polished, icy armor, reflecting the blue light of the tower's runes. As its massive talons grip the ancient stones of the roof, a wave of intense frost explodes outward from its claws, rapidly spreading down the masonry like a disease. The dragon settles its immense weight, arching its long, serpentine neck, and looks down into the courtyard.
And what is the disposition of our heroes in this final moment?
They are completely fundamentally dwarfed. They are standing in the snowy courtyard, tiny, vulnerable specks in comparison to the towering, restored structure. They are forced to look straight up at the ultimate apex predator perched high above them, framed by a black sky and blinding, swirling snow, the dragon looking down, the heroes looking up, and then the vision, the timeline, the entire temporal event abruptly ends. The historical record cuts to black.
It is a masterful, terrifying cliffhanger in the historical archives. It leaves the analysts and the individuals who lived it suspended in a moment of absolute paralyzing vulnerability.
We need to take a step back from the narrative to analyze the sheer magnitude of what just occurred in this chapter of the archives. Because this event was not simply a difficult combat encounter. This was a fundamental paradigm shift for every single character involved. Consider the profound psychological realization that must have washed over Plepjelip, Turin, Ohio Jim, Imogen, and Lyra. When they woke up that morning, they were adventurers trying to survive the wilderness, looking to recover a lost dwarven friend and maybe secure some wealth. By the end of this temporal fracture, they realized they are pawns moving across a board they didn't even know existed. They have glimpsed forces, armies of red hands, five-headed dragon gods, deep-cover conspiracies that make their individual struggles seem infinitesimally small.
This event forces a complete reevaluation of their purpose and their environment. As historians analyzing this, we must ask the same questions they undoubtedly asked themselves. Was this a literal journey into the past? Did the magic physically transport their bodies back to the era when Old Owl Well was at the height of its power? Or was it a dark, highly detailed glimpse of an inevitable frozen future? Or, perhaps most intriguingly, was this a targeted divine warning from Savras, meant explicitly to inject the knowledge required to change the course of history?
That is the ultimate question of this entire historical juncture. If a god of prophecy pulls back the curtain and shows you the end of the world, is it a threat? Is it a statement of unavoidable fact? Or is it an instruction manual on how to dismantle the apocalypse? Which brings us to a lingering, deeply philosophical thought I want to leave with you, our listener, today. It's something to carry with you as you process these records. It touches on a debate that scholars have had for centuries regarding this specific event.
We're approaching the philosophical intersection of determinism and free will.
We absolutely are. Think about the mechanics of prophecy, particularly when applied on this scale. When the sky itself turns into a giant, unblinking eye to show you the exact sequence of the apocalypse, when reality physically shatters like glass just to place a massive white dragon directly in your path, what happens to the concept of free will?
It is a profound query. If we apply the observer effect to divine prophecy, the idea that the mere act of observing a phenomenon alters its trajectory, we have to wonder what Savras accomplished. If the past and the future can bleed together so violently, and if visions of the end are delivered with such overwhelming, terrifying certainty, are our heroes actually writing their own history? When Lyra swings her sword, when Ohio Jim decides to hide, when Imogen breathes fire, are those their independent choices? Or are they simply acting out a script, walking a predetermined path that is already frozen in ice, dictated by the intricate machinations of gods, ancient beasts, and temporal laws they cannot control?
It makes you wonder if the struggle to survive is the actual point of their existence, or if the final outcome of the Sword Coast is already written in the archives of the gods, regardless of what they do. It's a heavy, terrifying thought to carry with you into the snow. We will return to the records to uncover how they survived this frozen nightmare, but until then, remember, history is never as solid as it seems. Keep questioning the narrative, keep digging into the past, and we will see you on the next deep dive.